I'm Robin Anselmi, President of Global Consulting Services for Conversant. I'm joined by three of my colleagues. I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves here in just a minute. As folks are joining, maybe Kel, would you like to give some instruction about the technology that we're using today, just so everybody's on the same page?
Happy to. My name is Kel Delaney. I'm a consultant and experience designer at Conversant. If you are unfamiliar with Zoom, although I'm guessing a lot of you probably have been using it over the past couple of weeks, at the bottom of your screen should be a little chat icon. If you click that, and it should open a panel. Just say hi, say where you're from. We'd love to hear where everyone is, where you're located. So just type that into the chat. And we welcome you to use that as much as you wish throughout the call. You can talk to each other. You can send through questions. It's really a great way to interact. We track it as best we can, and we'll address whatever we can along the way. But we also save it, and we'll do our best to either create blog posts or other things in the future to more address everyone's questions in a more focused way.
Great, thanks.
How about you?
Hi everyone, I'm Katie Mingo. I'm an associate consultant and project orchestrator at Conversant. I'm really excited about the call today. Gretchen, how are you doing?
Great, I'm doing great. It's Gretchen Gagel. I'm Managing Director Asia Pacific, and I'm in Melbourne, Australia.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining. This is our second version of community conversation. And this week we really want to focus on my meeting got canceled, now what? And if I were to expand that, the conversation really is about how do we engage and align our teams when we're in a virtual setting. And we've been spending a lot of time with clients over the last couple of weeks on that topic. We think we've learned some interesting lessons that we want to share with you, because hopefully it's helpful for you as you're looking at how do you design your meetings and interactions. So over the course of our time today, if you would in the chat, let us know, what are you finding to be particularly challenging about engaging and aligning your teams or your organizations in this sort of a virtual setting? Or what have you been finding that's been really successful? Because we want to be able to share some of those stories along the way too. Katie, you and I have spent a lot of time over the past couple of weeks, really probably since the beginning of February, looking at large events, meetings that we're going to have more than 50 people in them, and really looking at how do we design those. What have you been learning? What do you think is sort of inherent in our design thinking as we've been trying to transition those to a virtual world?
Right. So it seems like we've been talking about it as well as the rest of the world for the last several weeks and several months. But what really comes to mind is, as much as it's so easy to think about and care for like those in-person interactions and really be attached to what you're creating in an in-person environment, we really want to zoom out and make sure that we're thinking about in-person events and those large events as just one method. So Conversant, we talk often about purpose before method. So really sticking true to what are you bringing people together in order to achieve? What is the purpose of bringing everyone together? And that's often about networking or relationship or about recognition or about a launch. And oftentimes we see those, there's a lot of emotional components to it. So we really want to see how can we recapture that and how do we express that in different ways when everyone is dispersed. Robin, what else is on your mind?
Well, what's interesting to me about that, and I'm curious what others would have to say, is that when we are bringing groups of people together in those larger sort of 50-person, there really is an emotional component, I think, that we're trying to get to. And so what are some of the things we've been doing around the globe to have some of that emotion be present? And I'll open that up for any of us. Just what are some of the things we've been noticing that actually we can create emotion in settings like this? Cal or Gretchen, anything you would want to say? Cal, thanks.
Well, for me, there are lots of different methods, but some of the things that have been really fun is, it's a little struggle. I think people are uncomfortable getting on video. but video is such a great way to connect. And, you know, Robin and I had this group, a client last week that we were working with, and the first day was a little awkward and uncomfortable. But by the second morning, people were hilarious, telling jokes and really connecting in a great way. And they were blowing up the chat. They were just using it intensely to talk to each other, to share ideas in parallel with what was happening in the video part of the session. And it was such a great way that everyone got excited and connected. And I know, Meridian, you had asked a question earlier about the challenge you have is how do you keep people engaged for long calls? First off, we'd say keep them to 90 minutes or less per session. But secondly is video and then chat. And people will naturally start to just converse. That's our nature.
Yeah, I think that interaction is key. So you don't necessarily want to be projecting and presenting for hours upon end. You really want to build in that interactivity, whether it's in chat or in smaller groups, and give people something to do and something to engage with.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We were talking just before this call about the use of breakout rooms in Zoom and how effective that can be to take a big group and break them into smaller groups to have that more intimate conversation amongst themselves and bring that back to the larger group.
Well, I think that's really critical, right? Is that we have to really be thinking about how do we want people to engage with one another, not just with us. And I think often in this sort of a technology, what we tend to think about is just how they're interacting with whoever the presenter is. But really the thing about sort of those bigger meetings is a lot of what people get from that is the interaction with each other. And so how do we create that interaction with each other? The chat is really effective for that. The breakout rooms are really effective for that. But I think you have to put that into your design thinking around how do we consider that? And what are all of the ways to actually have people interact with each other, not just with the technology?
I think, you know, I'll just interject quickly. The challenge is we are used to working in person. And so we just try to duplicate that in a virtual world. And it just doesn't, it's a mismatch. It doesn't work. It doesn't work well. And so if you go back to so much of the benefit to in-person meetings is the stuff behind the scenes, the little conversations, the little connections we make. And so it's about duplicating that as best you can. So thinking through, how can I cause those conversations? There are some additional benefits, you know, we've talked about breakout rooms and other things, but, you know, Douglas, you asked about, well, how do you engage people in longer meetings, even though 90 minutes might be is a good measure or length, maximum length. You can take a half an hour break and then do another 90-minute session. But the important thing is you have the break. And then there's this benefit where people have a little time to reflect and come back with some fresh ideas and some fresh energy to the meeting, as opposed to sometimes in person, you know, how long do we spend hours and hours just sitting there and we get exhausted?
Yeah, I think we had a comment in the chat about 90 minutes being too long. I've been doing, you know, 90-minute meetings virtually for a couple of years now, and it's amazing how fast 90 minutes goes, but we also need to be mindful to just not automatically set everything for 90 minutes. I've been encouraging my clients to set meetings for 45 minutes instead of an hour because everybody gets their meetings back to back. So really be mindful about thinking, how much time is this going to take? But when you do breakouts and things, 90 minutes does go fairly fast.
Well, one of the things, Kel and I have been in a lot of conversation about this topic in particular, because one of the things that we've noticed is it's not a one-for-one translation. So however long something would take you to do in a meeting room, it may take you less time virtually, or it could take you more time virtually. And so Kel, you and I have had a lot of conversation about this over the last couple of weeks. What are some of the things you've been noticing and or guidance or thoughts you have to give people about how do you plan for what seems to be the right amount of time?
I think it comes down to, you know, what is it you're trying to get out of the meetings? And really being very careful and thoughtful about, okay, who's important to be in those meetings, what conversations are required to have to get to those outcomes. Start with that and then figure out, okay, well, how can we mix and match people in creative ways? We had this great observation by one of the participants last week where he came back and he said, this is really pretty fascinating. People can't have side conversations. And it was such this realization for him that you were forced to be more focused and in the conversation that was happening. And so there are all these other little benefits that as you become aware of them, you can start to use them to your advantage as well in these meetings. And so the no side conversations, when you do breakout rooms, how many people have been in an in-person thing where you say, all right, time, and 10 minutes later, people are still talking. Well, when you end a breakout room, everyone gets pulled back, and they don't have an option in that. And it's sort of abrupt, but it's also a great way to just get people back into the conversation and really manage what you're trying to do in the time you have available with the people who are part of the conversation.
It's also a more organic way to make sure that everyone's engaged, right? So if you're worried about people being on other windows or checking email during some of these larger group conversations, this is a way that doesn't involve any sort of top-down approach of mandating that everyone only has this open, but you actually do have to be in the conversation with each other.
Yeah. I apologize. This is one of the things about virtual and setting is that I have the sun setting here on the East Coast and the light's coming in my window, oddly. So sorry about the jailbird. I think one of the things about that, and Kel, you were saying this about the time. So for those of you who have commented like 90 minutes, like, but what if you have more than 90 minutes worth of work to get done? I think it's also really thinking about time and how to use the time a little differently. So some of the things might be spend 90 minutes with everybody together, then take a break, but can you ask them to go and reflect on something or go and have another conversation with just a few people as a side note. So some of the work that we did last week is a different group of people had a different conversation for part of the time, and then we all got back together. So you also can think about how you spend the time a little differently than having everybody together all at once. The other thing that I think is interesting, and Gretchen, I'd love for your thoughts about this, when we talk about bringing people together for strategic decisions, right? So I think that's another reason why we often want people in a room together, is they're really big strategic alignment conversations. What are some of the things you've noticed that are critical to make those be successful in a virtual setting?
Yeah, it's very interesting, Robin, that you asked that. I chair a board where we have board members in London, Kenya, Australia, and the United States. So virtual is a critical part of our board meetings. And we've found that social contracts and norms, and there was a comment in the chat about this too, are so critical to define. We want to be as effective as we can be. People are busy. We want to be mindful that people, especially in the current situation, might have a 3-year-old running into the room, right? And I'm just so thankful my children are grown right now. That's all I can say. But taking that time up front and just describing what that social contract, what those norms, what those meeting ground rules, whatever those are, we found, for example, that having a conversation about what multitasking did and how it impacted our board meetings. We need to come together. We need to make very strategic decisions. We need to be mindfully present in that conversation. So just taking time to have those conversations when you're coming together as a leadership team or a board or some strategic group, I think is really important.
Do you, and this is for any of us, like what are some of the norms that we've found to be particularly productive and necessary in this sort of a setting? I think we all have our go-to ones for in-person meetings. Are there any others that we would offer to people that we think are really critical when you're talking about a virtual setting?
One for me, I think we all need to be mindfully tuned into the energy that we bring, and even, you know, you can't emote energy as much. I mean, we feel each other's emotions more when we're physically together, but you're transmitting emotions in body language, whether you want to or not. Your camera is on, whether you realize you're smiling or frowning. So you might just be thinking about something, but people can take that body language in a different way virtually.
Yeah. Dawn, I see you said lean in, lean out. Our variation of that, which I have liberally stolen from a very dear friend of ours, Michelle Walmsley Ford, who was with us last week. She likes to say, make space, take space, which we've found works really well in settings, but also works quite nicely in the virtual setting. So for those of you who haven't heard that before, make spaces, if you're the person that tends to lean in and answer questions and take up a lot of room, can you just take a half a step back, not a whole step, but just a little step. So just make a little room for others to comment. And for those of you who tend to be late in the conversation or to sit back and let others sort of step in, can you be the one that takes up some more space in a particular setting? And that's been really interesting for us to apply in this setting as well. Kel or Katie, any others that you might add?
Well, I'm thinking that all of this goes back to, and I'm seeing Mickey here in chat chimed in, that it all comes back to bringing human elements into the conversation. So all of these ground rules are really are based in that. So we can get into the tech items and just create many criteria that way, but it's all coming back to what allows us to connect most effectively.
Mm-hmm. Kel, anything that you would add just about that from a sort of norms perspective that you think is important to really pay attention to?
No, I think most of it's been said. It's really starting with the human first. And the reality is we as we get uncomfortable, and these times right now, I know we all are stressed and stressed out from multiple aspects of our life. Our tendency is to try to find some sort of stability. And with technology, which is stressful even in regular times, people want the answer. Just tell me which tool to use. And even if there was one, within 6 months, technology is changing so fast, there's going to be another. And so it's really about, well, what am I trying to do? What are the connections I'm trying to cause between people? And then what's available to us that can make that happen? And maybe some other people have some great ideas. I'm watching, I'm getting distracted because I'm seeing all these great ideas fly by in the chat that I think the wisdom of everybody out there trying stuff out is the best place to go. Connect to the human to find more ways to do this well.
Mm-hmm.
I thought a great question just now in chat about how do you engage somebody when they don't have the bandwidth to have their video camera on? And I think that is a challenge when somebody's showing up as a blank box that just has their name in it. I'd be really curious for thoughts on that.
Well, I did see somebody say, like, I think part of it is how do we be much more intentional about that person, right? So I think about, like, where can we make analogies, right, to the being in the room? And we've all been in the meeting where there's the one person who's on the phone versus the rest of us in the room. And I think about that a lot in those cases, I think, Gretchen. So how would we engage that person? I think really being very intentional about asking them, about translating, I think is the other thing, because often when we're here, just like when they're on the phone, we're seeing something that they're not seeing. So how do we make sure they have any materials that we might be using that they can access locally, so that they don't have to be trying to keep up with what we're all seeing that they're not seeing. So I think those are a couple of things that you can do with those folks. Cal, Katie, anything that you would add about that?
I think sensitivity to bandwidth, as we're all working from home unexpectedly as well. So thinking about when someone drops off a call, what's the etiquette for when they come back in? Did someone recap what was said? Did they get it from someone else later? So I think that is a good one to build into norms.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually a bunch of research out there that shows that audio is one of the crucial components. It's wonderful to have us on video, and if you can find ways, I see turning off other background applications, things like that, great ideas. But if it's just not possible, having someone call in on a landline or a phone number, if they're engaged with the audio, that right there will make all the difference in the world. And like Robin was saying and Katie was saying, if you're intentional about it, involving them, it can be just as good of an experience for them and everybody who's there. And I think the other really important thing just to keep in mind with this is it's about that flexibility, being able to adapt. And often we show up in a meeting room when we're in person and we just start the meeting and we haven't thought about planning for the different ways people can be involved. What's great about the virtual is we actually can take the time to think about the human first and then consider the design of what does this meeting need to be to accomplish what we need to accomplish.
Well, and I think that that's a point that we really should emphasize again, right? Which is in any of these cases, what we're really saying is, wait, what was the purpose of the meeting or the gathering to begin with? Right. And it's interesting to me how many times we lose sight of that. We get really caught up in the planning or in the figuring out the technology, and we forget, wait, wait, why this group of people? What were we really trying to accomplish? And what were the outcomes we were looking for? And by the way, you might have to make some modifications, right? There may be some modifications that you have to make around what outcomes are actually possible now, given the constraints of this method. And maybe it's, instead of getting it done in a single day, we have to be willing to spread it out over a series of meetings, but that those could happen over the course of 2 days as opposed to in one. But I think it really is, how do we get clear on the purpose and the outcomes that we're looking to accomplish, and then have the method, have the technology serve us as opposed to the other way around. So I'm just curious, what do you all notice about that, and what are some things that you might add to what I just said?
Yeah, I completely agree, Robin. So I had a 1.5-day meeting scheduled in 3 weeks in Melbourne. We've now turned that into 4 2-hour, pushing the 90-minute envelope, but we're having lots of breakouts and things, 4 2-hour meetings over 6 weeks, where we're accomplishing the pieces of the purpose individually, right? So we've taken the overall purpose of that 1.5 days and say, what are the mini sub purposes? And we'll accomplish each of those in a separate virtual meeting in a little bit different way. So I think that's a great point. And also thinking that mindfully about not lumping too many purposes together, right, in one meeting, but maybe having to break those out in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great point, where the temptation when you're in person is to lump everything and cram everything into one day because that's the time you have. So this, I mean, you can look at the freedom that it gives you to come back and allow time for reflection.
Mm-hmm. Kel, anything for you on that?
Nothing more to add at this point.
Okay. Yep. Michael just made a comment about allowing there to be sort of some emotional check-in at the start. I think in times like this, it's particularly important, although I would say it's important at almost any, because, and Gretchen, you were saying this a few minutes ago, right? But it's a lot harder to read a room when the room is this setting. Some of the things that we've done, depending on the size, some of you've been with us when we've done this probably, but we'll do a, what's your one word of the day, right? So if the room is really big, that works both in real life, right? So when we're out in the room all together, but it works quite nicely also in a setting like this because people can do it in the chat. So even if you have a ton of people, you can do a quick scan of how are people feeling today. And then also you can sort of do it at the end in terms of how are people feeling as a close. Because I think how it starts and how it ends matters so much. That's true when we're in a room together. I think it's also true when we're in settings like this. So how do we sort of start and finish in a way that is inviting and engaging with people?
Yeah, I think adding on to that, Robin, is also adding the humor into things. I was saying the company that I was president of in the United States, we had a Friday virtual meeting, and we always ended it with a water cooler discussion of, okay, what's everybody doing for the weekend, and a contest of who's doing the most fun thing. So how do you build water cooler time into your meetings, I think is that sense of humor. And I think during these times, keeping a sense of humor is going to be even more important than it's ever been.
Yes.
One of the things I've noticed, and I don't know that I expected it, but the more I've been in meetings where people have been in multiple together, the more their natural creativity and sense of humor comes out. We had a call even within Conversant this morning where one person was wearing a hat, and next thing we knew, everyone was wearing these crazy hats, and I don't even know where it came from. And so, someone had asked about Energizers and other things you can do. And in addition to the breakout rooms and stuff like that, which just naturally creates energy because people end up having to talk to one another, there are a lot of great ideas out there that that people, if you create the culture and the dynamic where they're free to be playful together, they will do it, and they will have endless ideas. I just guarantee it.
Well, and I think the Energizers are really great, right? Like our colleague Roger Henderson did one that was really fun yesterday, where we were trying to see if we could all touch the top and then the sides, and then the bottom. So I think there are lots of ways to be playful here as well, to create some of the movement and energy that we would if we were in a meeting together. I also think that's the, like, yes, please get up and go stretch, right? So if we are going to take a if we are going to go for 90 minutes and then take a break, like, everybody get up and go stretch sometime during that break. Because again, when we're together, we can sort of be taking care of one another that way and really making sure people getting up and having that opportunity. But when we're in this setting, it becomes a lot more challenging. And so how do we be really intentional? Seems to be a theme. We said a lot about being intentional last week in our communication, and we're sort of saying the same thing again this week about being really thoughtful and intentional about our gatherings and what we're coming together for. I'm just paying attention to the time. I'm curious for Kel, Katie, Gretchen, what else is there anything else that's pressing on your mind that we haven't shared that you think would be really important for folks, particularly on this topic of aligning and engaging people in the virtual setting?
Yeah, I think the one thing that's popped into my mind, and I'm reading The Fearless Organization right now by Amy Edmondson, is psychological safety. So how do we create psychologically safe spaces where people have voice in a virtual setting? And just being mindful about that, that some people may not feel comfortable, back to your make space, take space, but even taking that to how do they have other avenues to make comments, et cetera. I think that's one thing that popped into my mind.
Great. Katie, you had a comment the other day sort of on that vein about empathy. Is there anything you'd want to add about that today, just that you think might be helpful?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's easy to say that we want everyone to have video, or we want to follow these guidelines. And I think just making sure that we're taking care of each other and thinking about what is it like for that person in their space. Again, I think Michelle commented on the webinar last week in a similar vein, but that I think will make a difference for others as we try to have the most effective meetings possible.
And so in addition to the empathy and the safe space and those components, you know, for me, I think we get caught up in like, what are all the rules I should follow to get people set up on these calls properly? Or what should I do to be prepared? You know, we have plenty of those lists and we have one of our own, but really it's just about the human, like we've mentioned, but also what would I do or how would I set myself up for a meeting if I was sitting side by side in person with all these people I'm about to meet with?
Yeah.
You probably wouldn't be multitasking, you know, things like that. You would be prepared, you'd be focused, you'd be listening to people, you'd be taking notes, you'd be present to that conversation, that meeting. And if you just follow that as your goal, you'll figure out all the details along the way together.
Yeah. One of the things that we were commenting on right before this is that we said in meetings in a meeting room, we're used to all of the things that could happen, right? The projector doesn't work, the phone doesn't work, somebody barges in because it's their room and we're getting booted. So we're used to all of that. And in this world, the virtual, we're having to learn all those new little glitches, like somebody's booting us out. Speaking of, it's almost that time. So with that, really quickly, Emma Rose Connolly is going to put a survey in the chat that we would love for people to chime in on so that we can hear from you and know other things that you might want to hear from us on in coming weeks. Next week, I'm going to be with Richard McDonald and Roger Henderson talking about presence in times of chaos, amidst the chaos, which we think is a critical leadership skill. And so we would love for you to join us for that. Emma Rose, I think, is also going to put in the chat the link to sign up for our newsletter. So if you want to get the notifications for these on a regular basis into your inbox, click on the link for our newsletter and you'll get notified in advance as these are coming up. Thank you all for joining us wherever in the world you might be, whether that's afternoon or morning for you. Gretchen, I know it's early for you, so thank you for being here with us. Thanks to everybody for joining us today, and we hope to see you back again next week. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.